We have with us Rabbi Ken Shapiro. Do we have him now by Skype? Yes, we do. Okay, let me introduce you. First I'm going to find my notes here for Rabbi Ken Shapiro. He is a senior lecturer and researcher for Aish Torah's Discovery Seminar. He has a BA in Russian language and literature, did graduate studies at Pushkin Institute in Moscow, has an MA in history from Vermont College of Norwich University, and rabbinic ordination from Yeshiva Aish Torah in Jerusalem. I just happened to find Rabbi Shapiro in this fantastic lecture online a few weeks back about why people hate the Jews, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Rabbi, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. You have an incredible body of work and many lectures, which and even this one lecture is going to be hard to compress to 10 minutes. But I thought we should at least try and touch on some of the key points. And of course, people can go to the aish.com website and find you and listen to the lecture. But tell us, Rabbi, about the history. I mean, if people think anti-Semitism is something that is just a new phenomenon, with the Holocaust and now with anti-Israel issues and so on, it's not the case. It goes back through the ages, and you've done an amazing job talking about it in this lecture. Can you give us some of the condensed version, if possible?
Condensed version. Well, I mean, first of all, we have to appreciate that there are many excuses floating around on the world about why Jews are hated. They fall into a number of categories: economic control of the world, Jews are a different race, we think we're chosen or special, scapegoat, we killed Jesus. If you run through all of these so-called explanations for anti-Semitism and look at them through the lens of fact and history, you really can cross them all off and recognize that they're basically all excuses. Really, none of them begin to explain the uniqueness of anti-Semitism. When I say uniqueness, we understand that anti-Semitism, as you said correctly, is the longest hatred in human history. It's the most universal hatred in human history, meaning that hatred of us is not related to any one ethnic group, religious group, national group. It is certainly the most intense hatred in human history. It's not just the Holocaust. We have the Khmelnytsky massacres, expulsions, pogroms, and it is definitely the most irrational hatred in all of human history, in that, to quote Professor Michael Curtis at Rutgers University, anything and everything is basically a reason for hating the Jewish people. I mean, the list goes on, and it's even things that are totally contradictory. Yes. Anti-Semites will say, I hate the Jews because they're capitalist and communist, because they're warlike and passive, different the same, strong, weak, rich, poor. So, to the untrained eye, it can be a bit overwhelming, this phenomenon, like what is causing it. But the reality is we Jews understand that if we clear away all the smokescreen, that there is a very profound and clear reason why we have been hated throughout history. Want me to keep going?
Yes, I'm all ears.
I'll launch right into it. And by the way, one of the sad ironies of anti-Semitism is that, if you read the writings of the early Zionist movement, I'm talking about over 100 years ago, people like Herzl, when dealing with the Jewish question, as they called it, they assumed that the reason why we Jews were hated was we were a nation in a non-natural setting. We're a nation without a national homeland. No flag, no passport, no army, no refuge, no one to protect us. When we have those things, then anti-Semitism would cease. The sad irony, of course, is that it's 105 years since the death of Theodor Herzl, and the number one excuse for hating Jews in the world today happens to be Zionism, the state of Israel.
Right.
And as again I said, it's an excuse. It's not the real cause.
There's no escaping the hatred, it seems.
Well, there is. It's funny. There's a kind of cynical remark that there's no business like the Shoah business, which is the Hebrew word for the Holocaust. A massive amount of effort and money is spent on focusing on the Holocaust, be it memorial sites, Yad Vashem in Israel, the National Museum in Washington. But all of these sites sort of dance around the issue, and none of them seem to be able to pinpoint what's really going on. Whereas we Jews have more or less always understood what has driven anti-Semitism. And what's most fascinating is that if you look into the minds of some of the greatest anti-Semites, you actually see that they understand Judaism and anti-Semitism far more clearly than most Jews understand what it's about. The person that we like to use in Eshet Torah, and I specifically use when I'm teaching this class, is Adolf Hitler. And the big mistake we make with Hitler is to write him off as being insane. And one thing I say as a historian is that truly insane people end up in institutions. Hitler had his neuroses, but he was a man of tremendous potential. To do great good or great evil in this world, you have to have a lot of potential. So number one was he wasn't crazy, and number two, he was a big intellectual. He was an idealist. As a matter of fact, I found as a historian that some of the most evil people were the most intellectual and most idealistic, meaning unlike politicians who will say things to get elected and then change their mind later in democracies, these guys, like a bin Laden or a Hitler, they're consistent. What they say is what they preach, and if you don't take them seriously, you pay the consequences.
Right.
And Hitler said a couple of very remarkable things about the Jewish people, and I can even read you a couple of quotes from Hitler that don't appear in things like Mein Kampf. That's a propaganda book for the masses.
Right.
But if you look in the writings of Hitler, like the recordings of his conversations by his personal secretary Martin Bormann, he's pretty straightforward about what he thinks of the Jew. He says things like, the Ten Commandments have lost their validity. Conscience is a Jewish invention. It's a blemish like circumcision. He understood a very profound point about Judaism, which is actually a point that I wrote a book on called World Perfect.
Right.
The Jewish people brought into the world the idea of one God and one absolute standard of morality. And Hitler was essentially a pagan. And you understand that the history of anti-Semitism going back thousands of years, when we were the only monotheists in the world, it was basically us with our belief in one God and one absolute standard of morality versus the entire rest of the world, which was polytheistic and amoral. And it had no absolute standard of morality. And we Jews were in the ancient world considered like people from Mars. And that was the great conflict that existed from the birth of Abraham to the birth of Christianity. And then along comes Christianity and more or less tries to introduce into the pagan world a moral system that's essentially Jewish. You always hear it used in the context of the Judeo-Christian ethics. But the reality is, if you look at the origins of the ethics, they're overwhelmingly from the Jewish people and the Hebrew Bible. But then you have popping up in history of people like Hitler. And if you really understand what Hitler was about, he was essentially a person who understood the impact of the Jewish people. He understood that we had shaped the world. We had changed the world in ways that no other people had. And by the way, he's merely echoing the sentiments of a lot of German racial thinkers, like people like Wilhelm Marr, who invented the word anti-Semitism in 1879, who actually, within their criticism of Judaism, are showering massive amounts of compliments on the Jewish people for being the most powerful, small but incredibly powerful, influential nation in all of human history that had overwhelmed, if not physically, at least spiritually, intellectually, the great empires like the Roman Empire. And so Hitler essentially understood that what he was dealing with the Jews was not a physical struggle of a Jewish empire versus a German empire, but an ideological struggle of a small Jewish people who represented the largest idea in human history versus his, I would say, neo-paganism. And you see it the best. It's very interesting. If you look at the words of the Hitler Youth song, it's very unambiguous, and I can quote them to you in English. I'm sure they sound better in German. But the words of the Hitler Youth song went, "We are the joyous Hitler Youth. We don't need any Christian virtue. Our leader is our savior. The Pope and Rabbi shall be gone. We want to be pagans once again."
Right.
In a nutshell, that's
okay.
Totally open and unambiguous.
Okay, but Rabbi, through the years, the Jews have been persecuted by Christians as well as others. But Christianity is based on Judaism, this idea of morality and having a conscience. So why did we suffer so much through the ages?
That's the million-dollar question. It's an excellent question. And you know who answered it best? Sigmund Freud in Moses and Monotheism. And it's a wonderful quote if you think about it. He said, the Christian world doesn't hate the Jews for killing Jesus. They hate the Jews for giving them Jesus.
Okay.
And the reality is, if you study again the history of the church, we know that the church largely, through most of Christian history, paid lip service to the values of the